We're going to start our event today. It is an honor and privilege to welcome all of you to this afternoon to a civil society forum on West and East African Parliamentary Monitoring Organizations engagement with the Pan-African Parliament. It's organized by the Center for Human Rights, the Faculty of Law, University of Pretoria, in partnership with the Pan-African Parliament, Parliamentary Network Africa, and Mzalendo Trust, which is also under the umbrella of the established PAP Civil Society Forum, a forum that has been running since 2018 after a memorandum of understanding was signed up between PAP and the Center for Human Rights. The forum has been meeting for example, in Rwanda, in South Africa, and then we also had the opportunity to deliberate on a proper process for civil society engagement to increase awareness and to popularize the work of civil society within the Pan-African Parliament agenda. The civil society has formed a steering committee. The steering committee has been engaging on the PAP through awareness raising, through meetings. We've been engaging with the civil society that are working on mining. That was in South Africa early sometime this year. The civil society mining in Daba had an opportunity to learn on the activities of PAP, the engagement of civil society, and how to collaborate in increasing the work of the civil society on issues of human rights, issue of development, issues of health, and various many other issues before Parliament. This is our first time to hold this engagement in West Africa after consultations with the partners who have been thriving to ensure that civil society in the monitoring role are engaging on PAP. We are very much grateful to have engaged extensively with the Parliamentary Network and Mzalendo Trust in seeing how best we could strengthen collaboration, strengthen the work that we do in West and East Africa. And we are hoping that we will be engaging on thematic, on some pertinent issues that are driven by some civil society organizations across the continent. We have been very much engaged on PAP, particularly since PAP has got 11 permanent committees. The 11 committees, they are providing an avenue for civil society, to consult with them, to bring in their issues, and to promote some of the challenges that we are facing at grassroots level. We have been very much engaged with 3 PAP committees, which we hope that there will be more opportunities or more focus in future for us to engage on PAP. Now that we have the COVID-19 outbreak, it has been such an exciting time and very relevant time to really look into how the impact of this coronavirus has done, especially around the vulnerable communities like women, the elderly, the youth. We have seen gender-based violence increasing, the vulnerable situations being, increased through the implementation of very restrictive measures that, impacted negatively on people's livelihoods. PAP has got committees, for example, Committee on Gender, Family, Youth, and People with Disability. How many of us are engaging with this committee to bring issues of gender-based and all the challenges that our people are facing? As you know, we Africans, we have strengthened, we have emphasized more on the duties of the family within the African Charter on human and people's rights. The solidarity and the unity are some of the basic fundamental principles that we emphasize within the African values. And then also another important one is the Committee on Health, Labor and Social Affairs. We had a meeting in July with PAP committee, where we were sharing the challenges or the roles that civil society is been embarking during COVID-19. Issue of development of a continental policy around health had come on board, and these are some of the processes that civil society can take advantage of in making sure that PAP is that important a mechanism or body, independent body, that is accessible, that we can engage with, that we can bring our issues forward and make progress on the continent. I don't want to take a lot of time in welcoming you all to this wonderful process, which we hope that we will be continue touching other sub-regions to make the work of PAP very relevant and very visible in our continent. I want to acknowledge and recognize the presence of Mr. Clement Pebe Mavungu, who is the PAP Senior Legal Officer. We are very grateful to have you here today. And I also want to encourage all the speakers that have been identified. Thank you for making your time, especially the partners, Mr. John Makumure. And then also we thank Mr. Semi Obeng, who is of the Open Parliamentary, who is the Executive Director of Mzalendo, who's going to be speaking on the Open Parliamentary with PAP. And then also Ms. Bonolo, who has been working very hard in organizing this. This will be our speakers for today. And Mr. Arnold Kwezi. Arnold, I know, is also part of the executive committee of the steering committee of the civil society on PAP. Caroline as well, Miss Caroline Gaika, who is the executive director of Mzalendo Trust. You are welcome, and we thank you for all the processes that we have begun. Without waste of time, I also will want to recognize the presence of Professor Frans Viljoen, who has been championing this process, who have really worked very hard, for some years now, opening doors of PAP, for PAP to recognize the agenda or to include the agenda of the civil society on their programs. And we are very grateful, Prof, that today we are, beginning to identify some milestone of the process to see where we are and how we move forward. I would like to invite you, Prof, to give your open remarks in welcoming us, or in just sharing with us the importance of the work that we are doing under PAP. Prof, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Colette. And yes, I hope to be brief as well. Thank you very much for this opportunity. The Center for Human Rights, I think many of you know, is at the University of Pretoria, and we present academic programs. So we hope in our academic programs to foreground also the importance of the Pan-African Parliament. But we, on the other hand, we act as a civil society organization, an NGO. We try to advance the African Union's human rights framework and the framework related to human rights. So it is in that ambit that we have a unit on democracy and civic engagement, where we have identified engagement by civil society with the Pan-African Parliament as a high priority. So it's within this framework for us that this project takes place. As Colette mentioned, we have seen the emergence of the CSO forums on the fringes, if you like, of the Pan-African Parliament sessions. And the purpose really is to bring civil society from the fringes into the mainstream, into the main arena of the Pan-African Parliament. I think we would all agree that the Pan-African Parliament suffer from a few disadvantages or challenges. Among them would be invisibility. For the ordinary African, the Pan-African Parliament is not very visible, that is clear. Secondly, I think there's a lack of understanding. And then maybe thirdly, arising from the first two, there's a lack of ownership, there's a lack of legitimacy really among Africa's people as it comes to the Pan-African Parliament. So the idea is that greater civil society engagement would at least address some of these challenges to the Pan-African Parliament and making it more meaningful within our continent. So we wish we could all be, in a sense, together in person before a session of the Pan-African Parliament, but I think starting virtually is a very important step. So the aim for us is to create collaboration and networks as we are doing today, so that collectively we can all harness the great potential that the Pan-African Parliament has. So let me then just also add my voice in conclusion to that of Colette, to thank everyone, to thank Colette and the other members of the steering committee, to thank our partners for today, the Mzalendo Trust, which is Kenya-based, and then also the Parliamentary Network Africa, which is Ghana-based. So it's good that we have East and West Africa here. Obviously also Bonolo Makgale, the head of our unit, our speakers today, but principally everyone else, the participants. We hope that you will find benefit through this engagement, and hopefully you will find that it is important and relevant for us all to engage more pertinently, more deliberately with the Pan-African Parliament. So good wishes for our discussion, and thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Prof. I'll now hand over to the next speaker. I think he's going to be the moderator, Mr. Arnold Kwesi. Over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Colette, and thanks for the introductions. Thanks for the welcome remarks from Professor Franz. It's really an interesting discussion that we've been we bound to have. I don't want to repeat a lot of the things that have been said by both Colette and Professor, but we all understand the unique mandate the Pan-African Parliament presents, and I will agree it's really important to harness that unique mandate, especially around involving civil society actors and other stakeholders within the operations of the Pan-African Parliament, because we understand, and working around some of the organs of the AU, especially the most common one basically being the Commission, and engaging within the different platforms, the importance of CSO and how it plays a critical role in amplifying, aspirations of the people, the African people, but also ensuring that there is a whole lot of engagement of state actors and different organs alive to the needs of the people on the continent, but also addressing critical issues that are being faced on the continent. So the PAP will always remain as this unique organ with a mandate that is basically to represent the aspirations of the people, but also ensuring that there is more effective and meaningful engagements of the people in pursuit of African unity. And as it's really anchored, getting this African unity through political and economic integration. I don't want to jump into broader discussions around this matter, because I have this afternoon experts on the subject that have engaged around it, and I'm very privileged to be moderating this session, and I will leave it to them to really break down some of these roles and the roles of the civil society, but also the mandate of the PAP, and where we can have various entry points as civil society actors and other institutional bodies to harness that mandate and ensure that we work together towards African unity through political and economic integration. My first speaker will be Ms. Bonolo Makgale, who is the programs manager at the Center for Human Rights. And Bonolo will basically take us through the role of civil society in the African Union institution of architecture, but more highlighting the challenges and opportunities that we need to be looking at, but also tapping into if we're going to have more effective and as Professor said, maybe strengthen the visibility of the PAP and other African Union organization, African Union organs. So and after that, we will be having Mr. Clement Febe Mavungu, the Pan-African Parliament Senior Legal Officer, who will maybe break down and get us better understand the mandate of the Pan-African Parliament and how we as civil society, because it's a broader point of this discussion, can get into, harness the entry points for effective citizen and civil society engagement. So Bonolo, the floor is yours. You have about 5 minutes to give us a broader understanding of the role of civil society in the African Union institutional architecture. Over to you, Bonolo.
Thank you, Arnold. Good afternoon, everyone. As Arnold has said, my name is Bonolo Makale from the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria. I program manage the Democracy and Civic Engagement Unit. First of all, I want to say thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and a great thank you to Parliamentary Network Africa and Mzalendo Trust for their partnership and being part of this new initiative and collaboration. We're looking forward to doing some great work with you in your region, and in particular in the work that you do in your national parliaments. A great thank you again to the CSO Forum Steering Committee for their support, and thank you to Clement, the Legal Office of the Pan-African Parliament, for being here, greatly appreciated. Mine is to reflect briefly. I've been given 5 minutes, so I'll try and keep it to 5 minutes on the role of civil society in the African Union institutional architecture. And so I want to start off by saying, historically, the story of civil society organizations in Africa was a love-hate one between civil society organizations and the OAU throughout the period of the existence of the OAU. The OAU Charter did not make any provisions for civil society organizations. However, when it was decided to convert and adopt the new structure of the African Union, civil society organizations were allowed to participate even in the legislative processes of the African Union, which led to the Constitutive Act of the AU. We see the Constitutive Act of the African Union, in particular the treaty establishing African Economic Community, which is known as the Abuja Treaty. It makes provisions for the inclusion of civil society in the programs of the African Union. The treaty itself articulates an Africa that is people-centered. In fact, the preamble of the Constitutive Act, for an example, talks of a union that is an African Union that is guided by a common vision of a united and strong Africa, and also by the need to build a partnership between governments and all segments of civil society. And we saw this move from AU into the African Union. We saw it resulting in the launching of ECOSOC as the official platform for civil society in the African Union. I mean, although this body has been heavily criticized, but technically we have an African Union law which recognizes civil society as the highest level and recognizes civil society as active members that could engage in legislative process of the African Union. But I think it's important also to highlight that the existence of the law does not mean that everything is rosy. We can all agree that many African Union organs are not sufficiently open to civil society engagement. For an example, AU observer status is only available to a very minority of civil society organizations. And it is clear that this organ that had been set up that is supposed to represent civil society organization is insufficiently represented. For an example, again, speaking on the observer rights status of civil society organizations, the African Commission has granted observer status to over 500 NGOs in the entire continent, while the African Children Committee has granted around 40 NGOs in the entire continent. And that alone says that there isn't a lot of representation within the different bodies of the African Union by civil society organizations. At the same time, it is important to note that there is a civil society forum they call it an NGO forum that happens before each sessions of the African Commission. And this has been taking place for a number of years. And this NGO forum provides significant possibilities for civil societies to engage with the Commission on various human rights issues on the continent. And a similar forum has been established in connection with the sessions of the African Children's Rights Committee. And of course, the Pan-African Parliament CSO Forum also aims to provide civil society organizations to equally engage with the PAP. So as much as we recognize that there hasn't been a huge representation or huge engagement of civil society organizations within the bigger framework of the African Union, there's been pockets of work that has been done with the NGO Forum, with the African Commission, and with the CSO Forum that happens on the sideline of the African Children's Rights Committee, and of course with this initiative with the Pan-African Parliament. And so civil society engagement at the continental level is particularly important, considering the tightening and shrinking civil society space in many African countries on the continent. Civil society has a fundamental role to play in bridging the gap between people and politics. We see civil society provide a mediator function that translates communication between ways, that translates communication both ways in the respective parties, and does so in many ways that foster development and progress in public relations. We see civil society generally are innovators by nature, and this allows usually bureaucratic systems of governance to take on creative and socially orientated ways of engaging with its citizens. Civil society are also quite essential enablers that the African Union should rightfully incorporate as a matter of good governance, owing to their strategic linkages with its citizens. Now, more than ever, we see civil society and other various formations that are playing a very critical role in governance. They're playing a very critical role in development processes across the continent. Awareness has been created that a united and strong Africa is only achievable through processes of solidarity. It's only achievable through partnerships and cooperation between democratic states and their citizens. And so it is important that us as civil society organizations, we understand the African Union and we understand its various institutions, we understand its different organs and the workings of those different organs. And this way, civil society will be in a position to engage meaningfully and interact effectively with the different organs of the African Union. I mean, we can all agree that civil society organizations across the continent are an asset that African governments can and should tap into. African governments should be a space to actualize citizens and civil society participation, since parliaments exist to facilitate the engagement of citizens, which creates the shared interest and allow people to engage. And just particularly on the Pan-African Parliament, just as I conclude, I think this institution in particular, like I noted earlier, that a formally established body by the African Union, ECOSOC, has not significantly facilitated civil society engagement across the continent. And we see Pan-African Parliament as an institution that leaves its door open, since it seeks to achieve the full participation of African people in its activity. There's a room for civil society engagement in terms of Article 7 of the protocol listing the functions of the Pan-African Parliament. And one of the principal role is to make legislation, but also to discuss and present opinions and recommendations. And therefore, civil society can explore the possibility of involvement on this mandate. And therefore, there is an open-ended mandate for the Pan-African Parliament to discuss any issues, any human rights issues, rule of law, governance, democracy with its citizens, because there's almost an open room and a space for civil society to engage. And we've seen that happening since the inception of this project, where PAP had opened its doors for us to engage with the various committees on multiple human rights issues, from giving capacity building on the African human rights systems, to engaging on illicit financial flow, for an example, to engaging on the Maputo Protocol, to engaging on the rights of older people, to engaging on issues around access to information during elections. So I think we can all agree that the Pan-African Parliament, as a body and an organ of the AU and the Parliament of Africa, is well placed and it's easily accessible, and each of us should find ways in the work that we do in our programs to really take advantage of the fact that PAP is open to achieve full participation of the African people in its activities. And so as I conclude, I want to say that civil society is a core factor in sustaining democracy, and it is not possible to imagine democracy without civil society. A strong and robust civil society is key to democracy in the continent. Therefore, the African Union projects towards a reformed Africa is possible if it embraces civil society as building blocks between its people and governments. Thank you so much, Arnold.
Okay, thank you very much, Bonolo. That was a very comprehensive and informative discussion around the role the civil society can play. Too bad we really don't have enough time to engage further on the discussion, but I think if given time, would have gone on and on around the different entry points and ways that we could literally harness this mandate and like you said, the open door kind of open-ended mandate that the Pan-African Parliament has, and how we should be able to utilize it to ensure more effective engagements with the Pan-African Parliament to help in addressing the issue around sustaining democracy and governance issues. I know a lot of things has been said focusing on the civil society, and because of time, I will not try to revisit them. Hope we shall have more discussions after the other session discussions. Now I will give the floor to Mr. Clement, being the senior legal officer within the Pan-African Parliament. He's better placed to actually give us more concrete advisory on the mandate of the Pan-African Parliament and how we as citizens and continental citizens and civil society can utilize the entry points for effective engagements and work towards a more unified Africa and integration. So, Mr. Clement, floor to you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Arnold, for giving me the floor and for the introductions. Yes. I would like to start by thanking the organizers of this meeting, particularly the PAP Civil Society Forum and the Center for Human Rights, as well as the West and East African Parliamentary Monitoring Organizations. I believe that it gives us an opportunity to discuss and find better ways of engaging with an organ, an institution which is supposed to be there for the peoples of Africa, for civil society and other similar organizations. What's up? Yes, okay, it's working now. Basically, I'm under pressure because my predecessors have been very short, and I'll try to be short as well, although I have a few issues to cover. I mean, many issues to cover, but I thought I could easily discuss, start by my summary, so that if I'm stopped before I finish my presentation, at least I would have delivered my message. Secondly, I will discuss a bit of the institutional evolution of the Pan-African Parliament, which will lead me to its mandate before I can discuss the opportunities for civil society and citizen engagement with the Pan-African Parliament. In my summary, I wanted to say perhaps 5 to 6 things or statements. The first one is that the Pan-African Parliaments as an institution set up to ensure the effective participation of the peoples of Africa in the African Union policy and policies and activities. PAP has a legal and policy framework which gives room and enough room for effective citizen and civil society engagement. And that can be seen through the PAP protocol. I don't want to take you into those legalities. The PAP protocol and the rules of procedure, we can discuss it further. Secondly, my second statement is that in spite of this, these legal and policy frameworks, opportunities for civil society and citizen engagement are not well and fully known. And where it is known, perhaps it is not fully utilized. Indeed, we can see now some emerging engagement between PAP and civil society, but it is not enough. We can also see some civil society and the citizens engaging slowly or to some extent on a bilateral basis, which is appreciated, but we think that there's need for more coordination and collaboration and even creativity amongst civil society. And also there's need for constructive and strategic engagement with the Pan-African Parliament. And my presentation will go into details. I will start by saying that the Pan-African Parliament started being talked about in 1991 when the African Economic Community was conceptualized under the Abuja Treaty. 8 years down the line, it was still an idea. And in Libya in 1999, when the heads of states discussed and agreed that they should accelerate the setting up of the African Economic Community, the Pan-African Parliament was indeed identified as one of the pillars of Africa's integration and development. In 2000, when this project materialized into the African Union, the signing or adoption of the Constitutive Act of the African Union, the Pan-African Parliament was then listed amongst the AU organs. However, there was a need for a dedicated protocol to define the powers, functions, and operations of the Pan-African Parliament. And this protocol was adopted in 2001. It entered into force, interestingly, 2 years later, 2003, and PAP for the first time started operating in a session which took place in March 2004 in Ethiopia. under this protocol, it was provided that 5 years later, there had to be a review process of the Pan-African Parliament, which was supposed to result into vesting PAP with full legislative powers. And as you may know, in 2009, that did not materialize because in international relations, negotiations can take a long time. It was only in March 2014 in Malabo that the new PAP protocol was adopted. And we normally call it the Malabo protocol, but yes, we use that designation for our protocol when we speak internally, mindful that when we are speaking with external people, there are many other instruments which we adopted in Malawi in June 2014. For instance, the protocol to the amended protocol of the African Court and many other instruments. But for the purpose of being short, allow me to call it the PAP Malabo protocol. And indeed, this protocol is still it's still undergoing the signing and ratification process. And for it to enter into force, it requires a minimum of 28 ratifications. So once it is in force, indeed, PAP will be able to assume increased powers, including in relation to its legislative function. Indeed, what I have just said could be summarized as in this chart. Basically, the story started in Abuja, and then in Sirte, Libya. It was materialized in Lomé, and then the protocol, the Malabo protocol, was adopted. The PAP protocol was adopted in Sirte. 2001, 2003, it entered into force. 2004, PAP started operating, and in 2014, a new protocol was adopted. As I said, it is still undergoing ratification, which means that currently we are still operating under the current protocol, which is the Sirte protocol, which was adopted in 2001. Just for your information, as I said, the new PAP protocol is still being signed and ratified, and you can see the countries that have ratified on the screen, and those that have signed as we speak. And indeed, I'll come back to it, saying that for PAP to assume increased powers, PAP also needs support, particularly in terms of pushing for advocacy and lobbying to the member states, so that PAP can assume the powers that would enable it to fully represent the views and aspirations of the people of Africa. I tried to present a chart on the difference between the current and the new protocol, but I'm pressed with time. All I will do is to just give you some 3 key points of difference. The first one, currently PAP assumes consultative and advisory power only, while under the new protocol, the Malabo protocol, in addition to consultative and advisory, PAP will have some legislative power. Secondly, under the current protocol, PAP, it is not well defined that PAP should play a role in the AU treaty making power. Indeed, PAP has been consulted on a very sporadic basis, and perhaps over the last 16 years of its existence, PAP was only consulted when its new protocol was being developed, and when the African Charter on Democracy, Elections, and Good Governance were also developed. Yet, under the new protocol, PAP will systematically participate in the AU treaty making process, and which is, as I normally say, treaties are at the international level, what laws are at the national level. And I think it's something to be happy about. Civil society engagement, since we are talking about civil society and citizen engagement, under the current protocol, it is an implied mechanism, while under the new protocol, it is explicitly included. It does not even limit to citizen and civil society. It goes as far as including diaspora as one of the stakeholders with which the PAP should be working. Lastly, PAP under the current protocol, it is silent that PAP as to how PAP can exercise its oversight function over other AU organs. Under the new protocol, it is clear that PAP shall be receiving and considering reports of other AU organs with some exceptions. So I think I can just jump to talk a little bit about the mandate of the Pan-African Parliament, which can be clustered into four. Firstly, advisory power, where PAP has authority to discuss at its own initiative and to express opinion on any matter relating to the AU organs, regional economic communities, or any member states. And I think Bonolo touched on it. And I think any matter leaves the rooms very open to the extent that any human rights issue, any governance issue, any peace and security issue, and many other issues can fall under the table of the Pan-African Parliament, for the PAP to consider and express an opinion. Consultative power, advisory power, PAP discusses issues at its own initiative and expresses an opinion. Consultative power is where PAP has authority to discuss at the request of other AU organs, regional economic communities, or any member states. And we have had situations where, for instance, the African Union Commission, or APRM, NEPAD, or a specific member state brings to PAP a specific matter to discuss and formulate recommendations of. The third one, I touched on it, oversight power. And as I said, it is not very elaborate, but at least some provisions can be understood to give PAP some authority to invite other organs to come and make presentations or even present reports on specific issues, policies, and programs of the African Union. Lastly, the Pan-African Parliament has authority to examine and debate the African Union budget and to formulate recommendations to the Assembly. And I must also indicate that this power is not fully exercised, but it is still exercised somehow. I'll spare you some details on that. And basically what I said, all these three functions of PAP are exercised against or with, and in the context of this constellation of AU organs, whether they are policy organs, technical and advisory institutions, judicial and quasi-judicial organs, and even the financial organs, which are yet to see the light of the day. How does PAP function? The Pan-African Parliament has organs, the first of which being the plenary, which is basically the meeting of all members of Parliament as nominated by the member states or elected to sit at the Pan-African Parliament. And it is the highest policy and decision-making body. And plenary puts in place a bureau, which is made of a president and 5 vice presidents representing the 5 African regions. And the plenary also puts into place some permanent committees which deal with specific thematic issues. There are also some internal structures such as regional caucuses and thematic caucuses like the youth and women caucuses, the Pan-African Parliament Alliance on Food Security and Nutrition, which are basically spaces for political consensus and internal consultation on various issues of interest to the sub-regions and to interest groups like women and youth. The PAP also has a secretariat, which I'm a part of as legal counsel, which supports, provides technical and logistical support and policy support to the bureau, to the plenary, and to permanent committees, as well as the other structures of the Pan-African Parliament. I also want to indicate that the Pan-African Parliament, in its work, uses a committee-based approach, which means that much of the work of Parliament is done or substantively done at the level of committees, which then bring it to plenary for adoption. And as you can see on the screen, we have 11 permanent committees dealing with a wide range of policy areas. And I think with civil society organizations, at least every civil society organization can see the thematic area in which they work and under which, and basically the committee, the PAP committee, which with which they could potentially engage or work. I just want to highlight that on number 9, we have a Committee on Justice and Human Rights, which is the most engaged by civil society organizations and perhaps the Committee on Health and the Committee on Gender. But we have many other committees that can be relevant to the work of civil society. The Pan-African Parliament as an institution holds 2 ordinary sessions, normally one in May and another one in October. And each of those ordinary sessions are preceded at least a month or 2 months before by committee sittings, which are meant to prepare the work which will go to plenary. The work of the Pan-African Parliament culminates generally into a decision which can take 3 different forms. It could be a resolution, and resolutions are directed, are decisions of PAP that are directed at PAP's own organs, and it is meant to be of internal application. For instance, plenary may decide that a PAP should undertake an electoral observation mission to a specific country, or may decide that a fact-finding mission be conducted to a specific country. Who is going to undertake this fact-finding mission? If it is PAP, then it's a resolution. But if the decision is directed at, expected to be implemented by a third body or actor or party, it is called a recommendation. And indeed, PAP normally issues a lot of recommendations, most of which are addressed to the AU policy organs and sometimes to the AU member states and the regional economic communities. Lastly, the work in plenary can also result into a declaration. Okay, the techniques are not, I mean, yeah, my IT is not working, but it could be a declaration, which is basically a statement that is directed at any actor and dealing with any issue that do not directly fall within the territorial or subject matter competence of the Pan-African Parliament. For instance, you have massacres happening in Israel. I'm just giving an example. And because we all share the same humanity, the Pan-African Parliament can make a statement. It will not be a resolution, it will not be a recommendation, but it will be a declaration, because the territorial mandate of the Pan-African Parliament is the African continent. Then what are opportunities for civil society? First of all, we have opportunities that are statutory, that I call statutory because they are defined and provided for under the PAP statutory instruments. First of all, civil society and citizens have the right to attend proceedings of the Pan-African Parliament, whether those that are conducted in committees at the committee level or those that are conducted at the plenary level. Secondly, civil society and citizens individually or in a conjunction with others have the right to address a petition to the Pan-African Parliament. And this is provided for under Rule 72 of the Rules of Procedure of the Pan-African Parliament. I wanted to basically say perhaps that the Pan-African Parliament is not the only AU institution with a petition procedure. But it is very interesting, particularly for civil society, to appreciate and even use this procedure, which for having particularly worked and even engage and use the petition procedure of the African Commission, I can quickly make some, I can quickly make some parallels, not to demean the petition procedure of other organs, but to just highlight how interesting this could be for citizens and civil society organizations. First of all, when you look at admissibility requirements, indeed for all petition processes, existing petition processes, the identity of the author is basically a common requirement, whether it is a physical or a juristic person. But the rules of PAP require that indeed an author who requires anonymity can also be protected as such. Secondly, the written format and use of an African Union language also makes it easy for for any citizen of Africa to submit a petition in any language, any African Union language. Thirdly, the subject matter should relate to any area of activity of the African Union, which means that basically any kind of issue, being a governance issue, a peace and security issue, a human rights issue, a governance issue, could be brought by way of a petition to the Pan-African Parliament. And lastly, there's a requirement for justification of interest to act or the status of a victim of a particular situation. These requirements look common to all petition procedures, but perhaps what I could say, and which can be appealing to civil society and the citizens of Africa, is that the petition process at the Pan-African Parliament is less formal. Less formal.
Yeah, Mr. Clement, I would request that you kind of wrap up, because we're really pressed with time and wanted to give the participants a bit of opportunity to ask some questions. And we do have some other presentations. So I would request that you take about 1.5 or 2 minutes to kind of wrap up this discussion, so that we can be able to give the participants some time to engage in the discussion. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Arnold. I was landing. I'm sorry, the clerk of Parliament came to ask for something. So what I wanted to say is that this procedure is less formal, less onerous. It does not include other requirements. For instance, the possibility to have your petition rejected or not admitted on the basis that there's a similar settlement procedure taking place at a different organ or institution. There is no possibility for your petition to be said that it is time barred. No requirement for exhaustion of local remedies. Let me go and learn by talking about other opportunities that are not necessarily statutory, but they are practical opportunities. First of all, members of parliament have the right to move motions or to ask questions on various issues. And civil society and citizens have the possibility to trigger a motion or to work with particular or individual members of parliament and you know, feed them with questions on specific issues. Secondly, there's always possibility for collaboration and partnership on a wide range of issues. And I think we have even more and more civil society organizations approaching PAP for signing of MOUs and partnering on some specific projects. Civil society and citizens of Africa can also address a specific committee on any thematic issue, and particularly for civil society, have been being used as thematic experts. And it is easier, it just suffices for an interested organization to write to the Pan-African Parliament, and the PAP would refer the concerned organization to the relevant committee. Lastly, civil society organizations and citizens are stakeholders par excellence in public hearings and consultations that the Pan-African Parliament organizes. And lastly, they can support one or several activities of the Pan-African Parliament, such as advocacy on specific issues. And I think I will close there to say that my conclusion, I started by giving you my conclusion. I knew that this was probably going to happen. And I thank you for your attention. And I thank you, Chairperson, for being patient with me. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Clement. We really, really appreciate that insightful discussion. I know we've been pressed with time, and apologies for rushing you, because I think it was a very interesting discussion that helps various civil societies to actually understand and better appreciate the way, the entry points with the Pan-African Parliament, and how we can utilize that space to engage on issues to do with African broader citizen issues, but also African governance and democracy areas, extending to the human rights and other sector angles. So we do appreciate for that time. We know you had indicated of your inability to state the course, but we had one question, which maybe you could answer within a minute before we go to the next presentation. So in 1 minute, there was a question that was left in the chat room. And basically it was, and I know you've touched it a bit, but there was a question from Dudley Chikwengo. How do you work with CSOs through those committees? Is it through MOUs? And maybe in less than a minute, you could guide on that.
Yes, MOUs basically are used as instruments which make the joint work with PAP more predictable, more organized, and therefore it is normally used to for that purpose, but it is not a requirement for an organization to work with PAP that we should primarily have an MOU. With many organizations, they have been able to come to present, to make presentations to specific committees, and to build a relationship which then culminated into an MOU, which then charted a more sustainable journey together. And I think my response is that it is not a requirement, but it is something which would make the collaboration more effective, more predictable, more organized.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Clement. And I will basically, because we're wrapping up this session, I'd request Ms. Bonolo to give a 1 minute response on the same, because at least you as programs manager at the center and you've engaged with the PAP, how is that process? And how do you advise other civil society to work around that? In less than a minute, and then we'll hand over to Ms. Caroline to guide the next discussions. Apologies for the eating into the time for the next sessions.
Thank you, Arnold. So because we already have an established civil society forum, which encourages civil society engagements with the workings of the Pan-African Parliament. So if anyone in this platform is interested in engaging with the various committees of the Pan-African Parliament, can reach out to the civil society forum, can reach out to us.
No.
And you know, let us know which area of expertise they would want to offer to a particular committee. So we can provide a list of the committees, and civil society organizations reach out to us and say, I would like to offer this kind of technical support to this specific. And through the workings of the civil society forum, will connect civil societies with the various committees of the Pan-African Parliament. So essentially this space is to create, to close the gap between CSOs and PAP. Yeah, if that answers the question. So basically there's a space for people to reach out to us, and we'll give them access to existing committees and ways in which they can engage with those different committees.
Okay, thank you very much, Bonolo. I will not try to break down the discussion from Mr. Clement and Ms. Bonolo because of time. And so please allow me to hand over this to Ms. Caroline to guide the next discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Arnold, and for very good moderation. And thank you to the speakers, Clement and Bonolo, who've very ably taken us through the legal and policy framework for engaging with the Pan-African Parliament. So it's now time to listen to the other side of the coin, which is from the civil society organization. And to take us through this session on behalf of the Southern African Parliamentary Support Trust is Mr. Yohane Gadiwa. I hope I got the name right. Yohane, if you could take the session. And maybe just to start us off, Franz, in his introductory remarks, spoke about how civil society organizations have been in the periphery. And the question that we then seek to answer is how we can have CSO in the arena. And we've heard from both Clement and Bonolo that there are many entry points, but now we'd be interested in hearing from you how your experience has been working with PAP. So, Mr. Gadiwa, I now give you the session.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Facilitator. And I also want to begin by thanking the organizers for inviting us. I'll go straight to the presentation in the interest of time. To begin with, I wish to highlight that SAPST, we've got a very good and excellent working relationship with the Pan-African Parliament, and our engagements over the years have been very fruitful. In our engagements with the Pan-African Parliament, we've got an MOU. Last year on the 1st of March, we signed an MOU with the Pan-African Parliament, and the MOU clearly demarcates the areas of cooperation between our organization and the Pan-African Parliament. In brief, the MOU seeks to strengthen and support the Pan-African Parliament permanent committees. If we have had, the Pan-African Parliament has got 11 committees, so we seek to capacitate the committees in various areas. Our areas of specific focus are budget analysis, strengthening of parliamentary committees in various areas such as social accountability, monitoring, as well as public participation in the business of parliaments. We also seek to strengthen the ability of members of parliament in executing their oversight functions. As you may be aware, members of parliament of the Pan-African Parliament, they've got varying backgrounds in terms of professional and academic competencies. So we seek to enhance their capacity in various areas, including issues of gender, human rights, and so on. We also seek to facilitate the involvement of CSOs in the business of the Pan-African Parliament. As we have heard from my earlier presenters, Pan-African Parliament is not very visible in member states, and through working with other CSOs, we seek to enhance or increase the visibility of Pan-African Parliament through the involvement of the media in various Pan-African Parliament activities. And we also seek to promote exchange visits so that best practices.
Sorry, Johan, if you could increase
Yes.
your volume. If you could increase your volume a bit, getting some
Okay.
comments, people can't hear you clearly.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's much better.
Okay. So basically, I was saying our role is to capacitate members of parliament in executing their representative oversight and legislative functions. Since Pan-African Parliament does not have full legislative powers, we seek to strengthen the involvement of the public and CSOs in the business of Parliament. So basically, our strategy through our MOU with PAP is to provide direct technical support for identified capacity building programs, as well as provide technical support on the oversight, on the implementation of sustainable development goals. Then we'll also assist in research and documentation, and as I've already alluded to, the engagement with CSOs. In practice, we've been implementing various activities with the PAP through targeting specific committees. For instance, last month, we had an engagement with the two committees of the Pan-African Parliament, that is the Permanent Committee on Gender and the one on justice, concerning tax justice for children. As most of you may be aware, the COVID-19 pandemic has had ruinous effects on many societies. And in our engagement with these two committees, we were presenting a position paper on the effects of COVID on children. So part of our mandate is also to work on the rights of children, as most of the constitutions in the region and Africa in general, they are very specific on the rights which must be enjoyed by children. So we sought to highlight the plight of children through presenting a paper which deals with the allocation, the budgetary allocations that are being made to issues relating to children's rights. So the paper also meant to highlight issues of enhancing participatory democracy through involving children in the business of Parliament, particularly the Pan-African Parliament. And so this program, where it was conducted with a number of stakeholders and CSOs, as well as development partners. And like I've indicated, we targeted two permanent committees of the Pan-African Parliament, that is human rights and gender. Flowing out of the engagement with the Pan-African Parliament, two resolutions came out of the engagement. The first one was the Pan-African Parliament resolved to encourage national parliaments to allocate adequate resources towards fulfilling the rights of children during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. And secondly, another resolution was to establish caucuses that deal with the rights of children. So there may be need to establish children's parliamentary caucuses. So this has been one of our flagship activity with the Pan-African Parliament, and it's most likely that in the future we may see the establishment of children parliamentary caucuses flowing from this activity. In our engagements with the Pan-African Parliament, we made quite a number of observations which may be useful to CSOs that may be planning to work with the Pan-African Parliament. First and foremost, it is important to have a memorandum of an MOU with the Pan-African Parliament. Since an MOU, as has been highlighted by Clement, it ensures that there is predictability in programming issues. In addition to that, the MOU will also ensure that the areas of cooperation are clearly specified or delineated so that there is no duplication, particularly in view of the scarcity of resources. So an MOU may enhance complementarity of efforts between the various CSOs. Our experience with PAP has also indicated that there is a wide scope of areas which CSOs may engage the PAP on. Key to this maybe is the oversight on the implementation of Agenda 2063 on the Africa we want. And more importantly, there's need for CSOs to provide objective and demand-driven information on the approval and the ratification of the Malabo Protocol, which Clement has alluded to. We've noted that most of the CSOs in the region are not very familiar with this protocol, and it's an opportunity which we are willing to assist, because our area is mainly strengthening CSOs and parliaments in the business of parliament. Then we've also noted that there's the amount of information available on the African continental free trade area is not widely available in many countries. This is where CSOs may partner the Pan-African Parliament so that this flagship agreement of the African Union is visible in many countries. To assist this, there's need for CSOs, from our experience, to target specific committees of the Pan-African Parliament. We have 11 committees, some dealing with monetary issues, health, human rights, gender, and so on. So they can select committees in which they've got a comparative advantage. For instance, if a CSO is competent in human rights issues or issues relating to the rule of law, legality, and so on, they may engage the Permanent Committee on Justice and Human Rights, because this is the most appropriate committee. Because information on the composition or the establishment of the committees of the PAP it's not readily available in the member states. So there's need for the CSOs, from our experience, to target those committees which they've got a comparative advantage on, so that they add value to the work of the Pan-African Parliament. Then our experience with the Pan-African Parliament is that where there is a research that has been done or the position paper that has been produced by a particular CSO, there may be need to share it with the specific members of parliament of the PAP, or share it with the specific committees of the PAP, so that relevant motions can be raised in parliament for any resolution to be made by the PAP. Because the work of parliament, from our experience, we have noted that it's knowledge driven, and some CSOs are think tanks in various areas. So this is the kind of information which they must share with relevant members of parliament in their countries, who are also members of the PAP, so that such information can be brought to the attention of the Pan-African Parliament, particularly the relevant committees. For instance, we have CSOs that specialize in climate change.
Sorry, I have to again interrupt just in the interest of time, just to remind you, like, you have 2 minutes to wrap up.
Okay, thank you very much. Like I was explaining, there are some CSOs that have got competencies in climate change, competencies in the rights of children. They may do position papers and submit these to relevant committees of the PAP through the normal or the usual administrative mechanisms that are in place. So by and large, I can conclude by saying that our relationship with the Pan-African Parliament, it has been very fruitful. It was a mutually symbiotic relationship, which has enabled us to achieve some of our objectives of raising the visibility of the Pan-African Parliament in Zimbabwe, as well as bringing pertinent issues to the attention of relevant committees of the Pan-African Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Johan, for that great presentation. At least you've taken us through the different entry points in terms of capacity building, issues of signing the MOU, and you've also explained to us the different ways in which we can engage with PAP. I would request that if any one of us has a question for Johanne, you please put it in the chat, and Johanne can respond directly. We are way pressed for time, and it's important that we get to hear also from the other speakers. And maybe one of the things that you could respond to on the chats, Johanne, is I haven't heard much about the entry point for the national parliaments, especially where you're talking about civil society engagement. Do we need to engage with the national parliament before we, for example, sign with the MOU, or must the issues that we raise be aligned with those that are highlighted by the national parliament? So even as you think of that response and any questions that might come up, please respond to that. Our next speaker is Mr. Sami Obeng from Ghana. Sami is the Executive Director of the African Parliamentary Network, and with whom we've been able to start this conversation. And Sami, central to the work of parliamentary monitoring organizations is, of course, the participation of citizens and providing a linkage between the citizens and the legislatures, something that came up from the earlier presentations by the earlier speakers. And maybe in the next 10 minutes, you could share with us how, as an organization that's leading the conversation on parliamentary openness, what lessons can we learn from your work with the national parliament, and what needs to happen for citizens and CSOs across the continent to effectively engage with PAP. So if you could, Sami, if you could do that within 10 minutes or less, we would be grateful. So over to you. Sami Obeng. I think you're muted. We can't hear you. Can the rest of you hear Sami, please?
No, we cannot.
We can't, yes. We still can't hear you. So as he's setting up, if there are any questions for Johanne or even any of the earlier speakers, you could please post them on the chat.
Can I respond to the first question?
Yeah, please.
Okay, our entry point with national parliaments, we have an MOU with the Parliament of Zimbabwe and also the Parliament of Lesotho. We operate in the SADC region, and to facilitate our work, we have signed MOUs with various parliaments. Over and above that, we also work with the other parliaments, though we don't have MOUs with them, but we prefer to have a formal relationship through MOUs. And in entering into an MOU with the Pan-African Parliament, this was a direct effort between our organization and the Pan-African Parliament, since we've got a regional presence, and our objective is to strengthen both national parliaments and the regional parliaments.
Okay, thank you so much, Johanne. That provides clarity. Sami, are you ready now?
Caroline, can you hear me now?
Yeah, clearly. Please go ahead.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so very much, Caroline, and much appreciation to Johanne and the other team members who had spoken earlier on. And I am particularly grateful for the partnership that has been able to bring this together. Greetings from Accra, where I'm joining you from. Let me mention that just like Caroline had indicated earlier on, the work that we do as Parliamentary Monitoring Organizations specifically, when narrowed down to the effective engagement with the Pan-African Parliament, brings some very interesting angles that are worth exploring. And it is refreshing to note that the earlier speakers, both from the Pan-African Parliament and those who also spoke on the broader civil society engagement with the Pan-African Parliament, have touched on quite a number of the salient matters. But for civil society organizations like mine, like Mzalendo Trust, where Caroline belongs, like others who I've seen on the call across the continent, our work as civil society organizations dovetails directly into working directly with Parliament, monitoring the works of Parliament, engaging effectively with Parliament, and what have you. And so we like to look at these things from the perspective of how these engagements also can reflect within the work of the Pan-African Parliament. And let me state that as parliamentary monitoring organizations, the principle of open parliament, so my topic really is on the matter of open parliaments and effective engagement with Pan-African Parliament. The principle of open parliament is one that is seeking to help create strong, open, accountable parliaments at all levels, ones that actually encourages a lot of citizen participation in the work of Parliament. And this, as parliamentary monitoring organizations, we've been able to do effectively at the national level. And for sub-regional and regional parliamentary organizations, an opportunity like this creates for us the avenue to be able to look at how these experiences from engaging with national parliaments, which many of the organizations on this call actually have been engaging with their national parliament, how these engagements can translate into the work that the Pan-African Parliament does. Now, ultimately, the work of PMOs, like I said earlier on, is to help create strong, open, and accountable parliaments that are enhancing citizens' participation in the legislative process, and parliaments that are continuously committed to the principle of openness, and so here the ability to translate these expectations to the work of the Pan-African Parliament, at that regional level is very, very important. And this is more important because the very establishment of the Pan-African Parliament, just like the earlier speakers had mentioned, Clement and all, requires that there is full participation of the African people in the work of Parliament. And that participation requires that the Pan-African Parliament itself would ascribe to the principles of openness and will be working collaboratively with civil society on these. Now, civil society parliamentary monitoring organizations, in the quest to ensure parliamentary openness, is also looking at how we can get parliaments closer to the people. And so it is instructive to note again that the Pan-African Parliament, one of the important reasons why this Pan-African Parliament CSO Forum actually exists, is to popularize the work of the Pan-African Parliament, to make it more visible, to make the people of Africa know that this exists and we can be able to engage with it. And that also falls within the mandates of parliamentary monitoring organizations. And so that creates for an exciting, opportunity to work closer and together. Now, in all of these, parliamentary monitoring organizations in their workings with the various national parliaments recognize the needs for increased collaboration and dialogue, with national parliaments, sub-national parliaments, regional parliaments, and what have you. And this principle of dialogue is what the concept of open parliaments with the Pan-African Parliament, seeks to espouse. Because whereas the representatives from the Pan-African Parliament and our colleagues CSO members who have spoken earlier on have spoken about how smooth the workings with civil society has been, at least so far, it is important to enhance these engagements, because civil society organizations ultimately in our respective countries serve as that, coordinating the fulcrum around which the relationship between the citizens and the elected officials, seem to work, and the same should be translated to the work of the Pan-African Parliament. Now, if we can work with the Pan-African Parliament as parliamentary monitoring organizations effectively to ensure accountability, openness, create strong relationships, ensure active citizen participation in it, what are some of the elements that will be required? And my reflections, are that we need to be looking at measures through which the Pan-African Parliament seeks to ensure improved access to parliamentary information from the PAPs. When the PAP meets and the PAP holds its engagement, how do we ensure that these information from the PAP's engagement, the committee level and all of that, are reflected, accessible, open, because parliamentary information, even at the level of the PAP, belongs to the people. And if active citizen participation is one of the things that is being called upon by the PAP, then we must be able to be seen to be engaging strongly. Of course, the issue about some of the opportunities being how civil society, parliamentary monitoring organizations, and civil society at large can be providing some form of technical support to the committees of the Pan-African Parliament cannot be overemphasized. And I think earlier speakers have spoken about it, and I would not want to belabor the point on that. Of course, the bits about collaborations and partnerships with the Pan-African Parliament, examples have been given by earlier speakers on how this is working and how it can be improved. So I don't also intend to belabor the points on that. But just to be able to say that this transitions into two main angles that we see parliamentary monitoring organizations working actively with the Pan-African Parliament, even as we leverage on the experiences with working with our respective national parliaments. There is the Pan-African Parliament angle, and then there's also the national parliament angle. So at the level of the Pan-African Parliament, how are we, as parliamentary monitoring organizations, able to provide feedback and technical support in our various areas of expertise to the committees of the Pan-African Parliament I have already mentioned, the petition module that has actually been espoused by the earlier speaker, how we can connect into that, how we can ensure that from the level of our national parliaments, we can have the representatives from our respective nations also being supported through the work of parliamentary monitoring organizations and CSOs at large at the national level to provide technical, information that could be used for debates and arguments on the floor of the Pan-African Parliament. But to round it all up, it also comes down to how civil society parliamentary monitoring organizations, because of the nature of our work, can also play a role in ensuring that the work of the PAP does not just end in South Africa when the PAP convenes, but when the members of the Pan-African Parliament who come from respective countries come back home, there will be that monitoring mechanism to ensure that the very things that have been discussed at the Pan-African Parliament will be, localized monitoring together. And when I talk about parliamentary monitoring organizations in this context, I talk about it both from civil society parliamentary monitoring organizations angle and the media angle, so that when we as PMOs, when we as civil society organizations, having provided all of these engagements and support and working relationship with the Pan-African Parliament at large, we then have a responsibility as PMOs to ensure that we are tracking and monitoring the feedback that our respective representatives who represent our national parliaments at the Pan-African Parliament are bringing back home. Sometimes there is even time gap within which the national parliaments are able to adapt the very conversations that goes on at the Pan-African Parliament. And so this must, I mean, we have an active role to play as PMOs at our respective national levels, because work at Pan-African Parliament must not be seen as holiday session for our respective members of parliament and members of the National Assembly who go to South Africa a couple of times in a year to engage with the PAP session. And once they come home, not much is seen from the work that the PAP has done. And I think that this is very, very important to emphasize. So essentially, the PAP can remain open, accessible, working collaboratively with parliamentary monitoring organization through a lot of openness mechanism, through a lot of access to parliamentary information, through these collaborations, which has been espoused, by earlier speakers. But more importantly, we can also have the other side of the road to play by ensuring that when our people come back from the Pan-African Parliament, we have a mechanism to track the work that was done there, and how it translates into the day-to-day lives of the people that live in our respective countries. And so, Caroline, this is the point at which I would want to wrap it all up with my reflections on how the work of PMOs fitting into open parliaments converges with our engagement, effective engagement with the Pan-African Parliament.
Thank you very much, Sami, and for excellent also time management. So since you're still there and the next session is around way forward and next steps, I think in the interest of time, I would request that you quickly give your remarks on the next step, and then I'll give it over to Colette to also give her remarks on the way forward, and we can wrap it up. Just tweaking the program a little bit, yeah.
Yes, very well. And so on the bit about the next steps, I think that from the organized Pan-African Parliament CSO Forum that initiated this discussion and got us as PMOs from the Eastern and Western African countries to engage on this platform today. The ultimate thing was to be able to expose us to how CSOs can engage with the Pan-African Parliament, the structures of the Pan-African Parliament, so that we can be able to better understand, and how we can be able to connect with the Pan-African Parliament CSO Forum to ensure that we can support and work with the Pan-African Parliament, and that is good. As parliamentary monitoring organizations, you recall that together with Mzalendo and other and all of you as PMOs who actually joined in that particular meeting on the 15th of September, we engaged to start conversations around how we can build upon the already done work of coordinating PMOs together so that we can be able to learn useful lessons from each other. We can be able to share ideas, do a lot of peer learning and what have you. And that culminated also in this discussion with the PAP CSO Forum for this knowledge sharing session. Going forward, we know that a lot of work has been done in the past on parliamentary monitoring organizations and in Africa, and how we can bring ourselves together to advance more conversations. And what we are seeking to promote is that all of us as PMOs within these two regions that have been selected, but across the continent really, because it's not just about these two regions, we'll start actualizing the discussion to advance the already existing conversation of, gathering on one platform, communicating more effectively, sharing ideas on how we are holding our respective national parliaments accountable, sharing ideas on some projects and programs that we are implementing in our respective countries, which are furthering the cost of open parliaments across, and being able to promote, parliamentary openness across board. And that is the exciting part for us as parliamentary as a parliamentary monitoring organization, Parliamentary Network Africa, which is actually working with partners across the continent to seek openness. So going forward, we are going to be working very closely with the Pan-African Parliament Civil Society Organizations Forum that has been created and working with the PAP, but also amongst ourselves. There will be similar, more fora like these, where we'll be able to engage as parliamentary monitoring organizations, share ideas, network more effectively, and continue with the cause of promoting open parliament on the continent. And this will not leave the media out, because ultimately, not only are we seeking to create a network or improve upon the work that has already started on creating or sustaining networks of PMOs across the continent, but how can we also help and support media people, journalists, especially those who report from parliaments across the continent, to effectively do the work of bringing parliamentary information to the citizenry and making parliament more closer to the people. So in next steps, these are the things that are being looked at. There will be series of email exchanges beyond today to, advance these conversations from our side as PMOs. We would also be actively linking up with the Pan-African Parliament CSO Forum in South Africa to see the connection also with the PAP, and a lot more conversations like this are expected to happen going forward. Over to you, Caroline.
Thank you so much, Sami. And as I hand over to Colette, let me just use this opportunity to say that on behalf of Mzalendo Trust, we are also very excited to be starting on this partnership and to see the conversations that we began in September materializing into something more concrete. Like Sami says, we'll also keep, on behalf of the East African PMOs and ourselves as a national PMO, we'll keep the communication lines open, we'll keep up the conversation, and we are excited about the possibility of engaging not just with PMOs across the continent, but also beginning engagement with PAP. So we are excited about this new partnership, and we look forward to ensuring that the visibility of PAP that we have spoken about, enhanced citizen engagement with the PAP process that we have spoken about, and also more importantly, holding our local leaders, our national leaders accountable in the engagement with the PAP accountable. So with those few remarks, I just want to thank you all for, again, also giving me opportunity to moderate this session and for great conversations, and then hand it over to Colette, who began us off at the beginning and who I guess will then also send us on our way as we close the program. So thank you very much to the organizers, and over to you, Colette.
Thank you so much, Carol. Thank you, all the speakers. I think we have learned a lot today. What is important that has been emphasized is the significance of collaboration, and the African Union values. They emphasize unity, they emphasize cohesion. The civil society has got an important role. We've seen how the PMOs, they have been engaging on these issues, whether they have formal relationships with the Pan-African Parliament or not. We have seen that their work is very important. When it comes to the mandate of the PAP, we have learned that they've got big responsibility of defending the voices of people from the ground and ensuring that all the rights that are enshrined in the treaties of member states that have been adopted and ratified, for them to be enforced at national level, to be domesticated. The PAP has got that important function. Regarding what's the kind of roles that civil society needs to play, we need to ensure that collaborations increases. The PMOs, they engage with civil society. There's a lot of research work that has been done. There's little done that has been done regarding advocacy. Advocacy for getting the required number of instruments of ratification from member states is still rely on us. We currently have about 21 members that have ratified, and we need all those numbers that are still outstanding to make the PAP legislative function to be effective. When they monitor at that level, we will know that there'll be enforcement of concluding observations, of programs, of policies that are giving effect to the mechanisms that AU member states have adopted. And then also participation of civil society in public sessions. It is less cumbersome, it is less onerous process. You receive accreditation as you arrive, and then also popularizing the work of Pan-African Parliament depends on the role of civil society when we return back home and when we engage with them at national level. So we still have a role to play in engaging the MPs when we get home. And the work of Pan-African Parliament does not need to end in South Africa. It needs to increase beyond South Africa in reaching out. The idea of social media that has been mentioned by all stakeholders, popularizing and disseminating information, and the issue around education. Many of the citizens out there, they are not informed, they are not aware of the function of PAP and all the structures. We have been informed about the rules of procedure of the PAP and the PAP Act that civil society does not know how to engage. So there are many ample processes in the committees. Those committees that have been mentioned, we can collaborate with them. But however, how do we coordinate our work as a citizen? We do not want to see ourselves working as fragmented and losing that solid voice. We have the forum that we have started that is functioning, and it meets twice a year. It is important for us to increase work within the forum so that all these issues are collaborated in an effective manner. We do not need to work in silos. Working in silos has delayed a lot of process. We have mentioned the ECOSOC, which is an organ of the AU that open up doors as well for civil society participation. However, that mechanism is still not very much utilized by citizens. So we do have the PAP, and I want to encourage all of us to ensure that we participate in the civil society forum. As for the PMOs, collaboration, not amongst ourselves, but with range of civil society, working with researchers, also advocacy organization, and also the journalists as well, the media. And I was excited about the issues that were raised at one of the Pan-African Parliament's Committee on the Children's, and the results of that advocacy that very soon we'll be seeing is a children's parliamentary initiative. So this is a great achievement. I want to thank you very much, and I hope that we will continue working together. We will send you the information regarding our forum that has been running around since 2018, and we need to increase this kind of dialogues, these kinds of engagement for more enriched results with the Pan-African Parliament. I thank you very much.